Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest will bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our very special guest is Josh Pond. He's a writer for Nightmare on Film Street and is a curator of horror community. You've probably seen his Friday Flicks. Is that correct? Is that the correct title, Josh?
That's right.
Friday Flicks videos things on Twitter, and he's always tagging everyone in great challenges and just bringing us all together and reminding us why we all love horror so much. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us.
Yeah, I am so excited, and thanks for having me. And you are absolutely right. We're a little cabal of weirdos, and I love it.
Yes, and I feel like you really bring us all together. Like, you definitely, I feel like, are kind of like a nexus of all that weirdness in a good way.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's something that I look forward to when I pops up that Josh has tagged you in something, and I was like, oh, look at that. Because you just do such a good job of, like Mary or Beth said, bringing everyone together. And it's,
bringing
feels
some
very
positivity to Twitter. What can I say?
And needs it sometimes.
Oh, my God. And also, I think what I like a lot, too, is you've brought people into, my orbit that aren't horror writers. I feel like I know so many writers, but I don't know just people who love the genre and who are collectors, who are just fans who aren't necessarily writers. So it's nice to get to know everyone, not just the people who are writing about it, but the people who are just loving it and tweeting about it. So
yeah, well, great. That's wonderful to hear. Because I agree. I mean, I think that's part of what brings this little group of people together. And social media allows us to do that in a wide swath where you're not just looking for, locals that share your interests,
Yeah.
Makes the world seem a little less lonely sometimes and a little bit smaller. It's nice.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, it's nice.
So you write for Nightmare on Film Street, is that correct?
That is correct.
What do you do there? Do you do a lot of reviews? Do you do more features?
Well, it's changing right now, actually, because John and Kim Dahan, I hope is how you say their last name, but they're the editors. They're also the two that host the podcast connected to the website. And they want to change it to be a movie review focused type of site, and so I'm going to be doing a lot less of what I've done in the past, which is a lot of lists, top 10 this, top 5 that kind of thing, and horror news and reviews is part of what I've done there too. Hey, did you know that Napoleon Dynamite is going to be in the new Tremors 7? Things like that. Gotcha. And so it's going to be less of that and more just film reviews. So it's changing. But that's what I've done in the past is kind of a hodgepodge of everything, keeping you up to date.
That's awesome.
On horror news, yeah.
And how did you get into horror writing?
Well, I did some, I guess you could call it ghost writing for different film critics in the Austin area back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I've done film review stuff for a long time. But when it comes to specifically horror, it was really just a coincidence, but one that's so great. I was in the parking lot of the Timberline Lodge, which is about 45 minutes away from where I live in Portland. And the Timberline is where they filmed The Shining.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a perfect spot for me to meet John and Kim, who happen to be there as tourists because they're from Canada. And so I just hit it off with John, and one thing led to another, and they had just started the site and wanted some writers and people to join, and that's really where it took off. And I write for a couple of other sites since then as well, but that's where it started, was just a chance meeting in the parking lot, hey, do you know which entrance leads to this kind of meeting. And the rest is history.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. I didn't realize that's how you guys met.
Yeah, we met at the Overlook.
I mean,
that seems like
what a
fate,
perfect.
I know, right? Exactly.
Seems appropriate.
On brand.
On brand.
For sure.
So you said you write for some other sites too?
I do. I've submitted stuff here and there for a few sites, but the other one that I regularly write for is Horrorbound, which is Charlotte Hollingsworth's site, and is great. Very similar to Nightmare on Film Street, just kind of a hodgepodge of what's going on in the scene. It has a little broader scope because she covers books and things like that as well.
Oh, okay.
But mainly what I've done for her site is things, this recurring article series that is killers who could use an adaptation. So I talked, for example, I have an article about Robert Pickton. If you haven't heard of Robert Pickton,
yes.
You absolutely should. He honestly sounds like a horror movie that shouldn't be a real guy.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite. Instead, he's a real guy that isn't a horror movie. But he sounds like one. Just a bloody, disgusting dude. So things like that.
Okay.
A little broader.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So have you always been a horror fan?
Absolutely. And that actually is part of what is funny about this podcast, and what I love about it is that we all have had those movies, those moments, those things we've experienced as kids that scared the ever-living shit out of us. But the thing for me is my family ran a coffin-making and cemetery business, and so...
Really?
I know, right?
This is my favorite fact. This is like my favorite fact about Josh.
I know, right? I have so many great little pieces of memorabilia, like in my office and stuff like that. But so they were huge horror fans to my parents and grandparents and stuff like that. And we gave haunted tours every Halloween of the cemetery and just all that sort of stuff. So I absolutely grew up in a family that just loved and embraced the spooky life. And so you would think, like, nothing would scare me, right? Because I've seen it all and have seen it all since I was like 5 years old. But the thing is, we all have those books or those movies that just scared the living pants off of us, you know?
Yep.
And so it's
absolutely.
like, it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of like, oh, I had no idea what horror even was until I saw that movie, versus like, this was the 1,000,000th horror movie I'd seen. And yet still it scared me.
Yeah, I always think that I feel like us horror fans are kind of chasing that thrill, that movie that like
That
traumatized
scare.
us so much that scene, that scare, that feeling of like utter helplessness that like gives you that kind of safe but terrifying moment. And it just seems like that's kind of I mean, for me at least, I've always trying to find something that can bring me back to that initial feeling.
Absolutely, and I feel like a lot of people lately have been saying, oh, well, scariness doesn't necessarily like a horror movie doesn't necessarily have to be scary, and I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
But I think that for a lot of us horror fans, when we see something and are scared by it, it's like we want to go tell everybody, like, you have to see this movie for that reason, what you were just talking about, Terry.
Well, and I think I agree with that, because I feel like I've seen like there's that tweet thread going around, and I agree that I don't think every horror movie has to be scary to be effective, but there is something so amazing when you find a movie that can actually scare the shit out of you. Like, that's why I loved Hereditary so much.
Oh my god, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Because it actually scared me. Like, a lot of the time, I don't come home, and I'm not usually scared of, like, the shadows, but that movie made me scared of shadows, and, like, it made me run into my room when I turned the lights off. I haven't felt like that in such a long time, and that movie, and then Terrified, that Shudder movie from, I think, Argentina.
Oh,
Yep.
Those were two movies that I was like, holy shit, like, I am finally scared to turn the lights off at night by a movie. And that's that's so impressive to me. Like, I just feel like you said, I feel like I've seen it all. So it's hard for that to happen. So when I get that, it's like, everyone needs to see this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. You almost take a little ownership of it or something.
Yeah.
You know?
You're like, this scared the shit out of me. Go see it. Like, which sounds so counterintuitive.
Right. We know why we're here, okay?
Yeah, I had a couple friends say, like, oh my god, if that scared you, then, like, we shouldn't see it. Because a lot of my friends will ask me, like, well, what's a good scary movie? And I say, I'll tell them. And I'm like, but it's not that scary. And they said, that doesn't work. That's not valid for most people, Mary Beth. Like, you think things aren't scary that are actually scary. So, yeah. It's
almost like someone who has a really high tolerance for spice being like, oh, I don't think it's spicy. And you're like, yeah, I don't trust your opinion, okay?
Yeah. That's a very good way to put it. That's exactly what they are with me. They're like, I don't think you're right. I think it is scary. I'm like, I guess you're probably correct.
Right.
And the other side of things is that, like, and one of the reasons I hate getting asked by people that aren't into film that much is like, what's your scariest movie? Because I've given recommendations in the past, and then they watch and they go, that wasn't scary.
Right.
Because, like, I had a coworker that basically laughed through most of Hereditary. She thought it was incredibly.
Okay?
Ask Lord Paimon for help, because
she started drawing these like weird symbols, and like I don't know.
I don't know if she's okay.
She's like, this isn't scary. This is how life ought to be.
She was like, this movie is stupid.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
And I'm like, it's one of those things. It's like I don't know how anyone can have that opinion, because it just like it fucking rocked my soul. And then to hear, you know, so like, I don't like getting asked that question, because typically what scares me isn't going to be the same thing that scares someone else.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm saying that I love about the concept of this podcast, is just that it's always different for different people. I mean, for saying Nightmare on Elm Street, for example, a lot of people go, oh yeah, totally. But then you say something like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and you're like, oh, well, why did that scare you? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, in other words, like, it's different for everybody, and we all have our reasons why it scares the shit out of us. Or if it's Silver Bullet, which is one of mine, then I don't have any explanation. It's like, I have no idea why this scared me, but it did, you know? And I think that's true for some people, too.
Yeah, some things just like get into your brain and like fuck with you in a way that you can't understand, but it just like deeply disturbs you. I have a couple movies like that it just like sits in your brain and kind of digs its fingernails into you.
So why did Hereditary move you, Terry, versus not, you know, your scary coworker? You know what I mean? Like, who knows? That's the whole point, though, is some people it really sticks with them. Like, I remember the Babadook really...
Yes.
Like got me so tense and all this stuff. And then I left, and a lot of people were like, oh, so overblown, and I didn't think it was that scary. And it's like, okay, well, that's your thing. But for me, I fucking loved it, and it was so tense and wonderful. You know, so it's different for everybody.
And that's like The Witch, and another movie that I know that we all love is that, I mean,
I hate that movie. No, I'm kidding.
Art thou saying that it scaredeth thee? Yeah.
Yes. Well, and
I
it's
had
like
like
one
a
of those
pit in
movies
my
that
stomach the entire movie.
What's that?
What?
I had like a pit in my stomach the entire movie. Like my stomach was just in knots the
Yes.
entire time.
Well, the marketing did that movie so dirty, and I think like A24 does this, like it does their films dirty, where it makes it look like it's this terrifying, like nonstop action.
Oh, right.
But The Witch was not that at all, and so I saw it, and that was kind of like the first time I really realized how much I like slow burn, atmospheric character pieces. But then, like, I saw it with so many people who were like, this was so fucking stupid. That was a waste of my time. Nothing was scary about it.
Boring.
And yeah, it was boring. And I was like, you thought that was boring? So it is just and I think that has a lot to do with like the slow burn horror that gets into my head more than maybe other people, which is totally valid. But it is like strange to me that movie didn't like freak anybody else out that I saw it with and like I talked to.
Totally, and I think Hereditary is a good example of that too, because for a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, I thought it was going to be like really scary all the time," and it's really more like a tense family drama for the first 2/3.
Yeah,
it's just disturbing,
right?
Like it's just it's just like so disturbing and like viscerally upsetting to me, rather than scary. But like that's scary, like the viscerally upsetting moments of like her screaming on the floor. Like that's upsetting to me, and that gets me more than any like jump scare. Is like the watching the grieving process is just so awful.
And the part that like
like
knocked me in my stomach was and it was a dream, but when she basically tells the kid she didn't even want to have him.
Yes.
And I'm like, that moment right there was like I audibly gasped in the movie
so
theater
did
when it happened.
Right.
It's just it's and I think that kind of goes back to you were talking about the idea of the slow burn. I love slow burn movies.
Yeah.
Totally.
But you have to like kind of walk that tightrope, right? So that it can go into that kind of slow burn intensity, but then it can also go into a more I don't want to use the word boring, but
well, just where you're kind of getting impatient with it almost. Like,
right.
All right, we get it. Move on. Like, come on.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, like, and I can see The Witch being called a slow burn because I think it definitely is one. But some people have said that Hereditary is slow burn, and I'm
agree.
like, I was pulled through it the entire time. I thought it was like exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure,
I think
and so did I. But
yeah, I think it is a slow burn in a way, but like not to me. Like I wouldn't group it in The Witch in terms of slow burns the same way, but some people do, and like. That's the thing about horror that's always so interesting to me is like how people define things, because like when I was in college and taking a class on horror, like it's one of the few genres it doesn't really have like a solid iconography. Like Westerns have a very specific iconography and like spy movies do, but horror is so broad.
Yeah.
And it's and like you know what horror is and you can explain what it is, but it can just be used to describe so many different things, which is
very
why
mercurial.
I love it so much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you say, oh, it has to have gore and kills, it's like, well, what about things like The Birds?
Yeah.
You know, or The Witch? And then it's like, well, it needs to be tense. And it's like, well, what about a movie like Revenge?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not really tense. It's more like checking motherfuckers off the list one at a time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're not really wondering what's going to happen next. It's like, I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah.
So yeah,
exactly.
I mean, absolutely. Have you guys seen the movie It Comes at Night?
Yeah,
I was actually just thinking about this.
So was I.
Because like that was a movie that I think it was definitely a slow burn, and it was definitely, and that like A24 does, hyped to be something that it absolutely wasn't.
That's exactly why I mentioned it, because when you said that earlier, Mary Beth, about A24 kind of doing a bad job of selling people on a movie being very action-packed and full of, you know, that sort of drama, and then you see it and you're like, well, nothing's really happening and we're 1 hour in.
Right. And
but
all
it's
the
a great movie if you otherwise aren't prepped and primed.
I really love that movie, and like so many people hate it, and I get why, but like that, I walked out of that movie, I was shaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I remember one of the things when that movie came out, everyone was like, nothing came at night. And I'm like, no, it literally did come at night, because it's like fear. And the fear is what's coming at night. It's not like a personification. And I guess probably the poster sold it, because, you know, there's the dog and it looks like it's barking at something in like in the darkness or whatever. But it's just fear. And it literally does come at night.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great...
I think it's a great movie. I just think the marketing did it so dirty.
Oh, it did.
Totally. And that's why I use it as an example, because
Yeah.
to me, I feel like it could otherwise have been a huge hit, people talking about it like Hereditary and a lot of other things. But unfortunately, I think audiences were primed for something that never happened.
Yep. I think they made it look like a zombie movie, and it was definitely not a zombie
Or like a
movie.
creature feature of some kind.
Yeah, like...
Well, and then like,
Yeah.
whoa, am I here? Oh, my screen just like went dark.
Oh,
Sorry.
You're good.
It's like, oh God, did my power go out?
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
We're keeping that in. But yeah, slow burn. I love them.
Yeah,
Anyway.
absolutely. So, movies that I've seen, if we want to talk about some movies we've seen lately, I
Yes,
feel
go right
like
ahead.
Dr. Sleep was a little bit that way too, where even though there was action from the get-go, it still took its time kind of turning the heat up.
Yeah. Have you seen Dr.
I haven't
Sleep yet?
seen it yet. I've been...
Okay.
Forget I mentioned
okay.
it.
No, that's
It's
fine.
dumb.
No.
I've
I
hate that movie.
I've read the book.
No, I'm just kidding.
I've
Yeah.
read the book.
Yeah.
I have
So
too.
I know it happens, and I didn't really like the book. So.
Me neither.
Oh, really?
I think we've talked about this.
Yeah,
maybe,
I mean, like we talked. I think we've talked about this in the podcast a couple
Okay.
episodes ago. But I just didn't really like the book. I didn't think it was necessary. It just kind of seemed like a money grab. But again, like I guess do what you do, and I don't know. I've seen such mixed things on social media about it. But I
About
mean,
the movie or
about the
book?
movie.
Yeah.
So did you like the movie, Josh?
I did, but I also felt like with a lot of his recent stuff,
Mike Flanagan. Okay.
it's incredibly well made and incredibly gorgeous, and just a testament to filmmaking, like skill and ability.
Yes.
But in terms of how it felt, I mean, I don't really remember any particular part of the movie real stand out, and it's one of those movies that I really enjoyed, but I also don't remember a lot of it either. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Do you ever
Yeah.
leave horror movies where you're like, that felt like a lot of other movies, and not a lot of it jumped out?
Like you enjoyed it in the moment, but it didn't really leave an impression.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
exactly. Which I think a lot of recent horror is that way, where the skill of production it has gotten so down pat. I mean, people have the ability and access to so many great like editing softwares and filming styles and techniques that just weren't available to lower budget or independent film in the past. But lately it has become so accessible that you can have a short film about a demon clown and it look gorgeous. Visually,
Yeah.
right? Production-wise, it can look utterly fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of movies lately have been otherwise kind of mediocre films, but like if you just take them from a production standpoint, they're fantastic.
So you think they're more like style over substance is what people are leaning
A little
into?
bit, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I
Okay.
think a lot of modern horror is that way, where there's really nothing being reinvented. Like take Annabelle Comes Home, which I really enjoyed.
I surprisingly loved that movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed the heck out of it. But it also has a ton of tropes, and there's not a whole lot that's super inventive about the story. And everything else was just sort of fine, but at the same time, production-wise, it's fantastic. Like you put it
Yeah.
against a movie from 1989
it's
or
sleek
something.
as hell, for sure.
Yeah, and you'd be like, "Oh my god, a master filmmaker made this," compared to like I don't know, Killer Clowns from Outer Space or something. You know what I mean? Because it's just so much, so much more is accessible. Is all I'm getting at, I guess, is what I mean.
Yeah, and I guess there's like a place for those movies too that like aren't trying to reinvent the wheel, but are trying to maybe do them in different ways, like that are a little bit more creative. But also, I think it was just I think that movie also was such a breath of fresh air, and like that whole entire franchise of just feeling like kind of tired and just a money grab.
Sure.
I was just pleasantly surprised about how much I enjoyed it and how fun it was and how I actually jumped at a couple things and like had a lot of fun and like laughed during it. So
Great.
Did you guys see that in the theater or at home?
in a theater.
I saw it in the theater as well.
I'm wondering if that might be my problem, because I saw it at home by myself, and I just was not captivated at all. But I have a feeling that
that's
it's kind
valid.
of like, I have a feeling it's one of those like, roller coaster movies that you build on the audience anticipation, and then like if you don't have that kind of excitement that's building around you, it just sort of kind of fizzled for me.
Sure.
Yeah. I saw it at Cinepocalypse this year in Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
It was one of those like surprise screenings, and
I remember that.
And I was like, might as well go. And I was with a friend, and I had a couple beers, and like there was security walking around everywhere, which was so weird. But because it was playing ahead of time, it was like, don't take your phones out, don't record anything.
Oh,
and then like,
intense.
I know it was very. I was like, this is much security for Annabelle Comes Home. Okay, but alrighty. But
Fair
then, the atmosphere of the theater was so much fun, and like. It was one of those movies that's really fun to like grab your friends and giggle. And then at the end of the movie, they had an Annabelle doll that they put like it started giggling like all around the theater, and then they had like a spotlight on it. And it was just like the whole atmosphere. I think was like part of the reason I enjoyed it. It was like the first time in a long time I had just seen like a kind of blockbustery horror movie, and I had a good time seeing it. So Terry, that probably has something to do with it, like the atmosphere of the theater versus watching it at home.
Yeah. Absolutely,
had probably a lot to do with the way we viewed it and enjoyed it.
And in all honesty, I think that's a big part of what's great about film festivals, especially horror ones, because you get a chance to see something that you might not otherwise see, and then the crowd is very ready for it. And, there for it. Like, I heard you mention, I believe on the last episode maybe, about Hounds of Love, which I
that was a couple episodes ago.
Absolutely love that movie. But I saw that at a film festival, and everyone loved it. It won the best, like the biggest prize of the fest and stuff like that. And then I felt like nobody was talking about it after I left the film festival, And so it's great to be in that setting where you're like, oh man, we're all here and seeing this and loving this and experiencing this together.
Yeah, that's what I've learned from going to my limited amount of festivals last year was definitely that kind of atmosphere and that community. It just sort of it's the best way to see a good movie, I think.
And the movie that everyone was the surprise screening at that film festival, and just to your point, Mary Beth, about how they can be over dramatic about it all sometimes, was Stephanie, the movie by Akiva Goldsman, which if you haven't heard of, that's kind of to my point, because once it came out, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't really do anything once it came out, but it was the same sort of vibe where they're like, we're checking everyone's phones and, all this stuff. And it's like, okay, like, great. This movie is not that big of a deal. Where everyone relax.
The only time I've been at a theater that happened was Love, Simon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, same sort of
thing.
Okay. And you're like, okay, well, this is a cool movie, but, like, relax.
Yeah. Right.
So, Terry, have you watched, like, kind of moving to, like, what else we've seen recently? Have you watched anything recently, Terry?
I did actually.
Ooh.
Today. I had to drop a lot of money in my car today to get new tires, which is always fun. But because of that, I
never
got
want
home.
to spend money on that.
I know, especially the amount that I dropped. Anyway, so like, but I got home early from work, and I was like, you know what? I've been meaning to watch this movie. I had the screener, and it's under embargo, so I can't really talk about it, except that this episode will premiere when it's no longer under embargo. So I watched Daniel Isn't Real today.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah,
and
nice.
I think that the director, Adam Egypt Mortimer, should, and I just tweeted this like a little bit ago, but I think he should direct a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It's been in the news. There's talk about like how he wants to do it. This movie is basically, if you strip out kind of like the gay subtext, although there is a little bit of homoeroticism in this, it's basically kind of like Freddy 2, Freddy's Revenge. There is like an atmosphere to this movie where, because the idea is that this guy named Luke, when he's a kid, he witnesses a violent trauma, and then all of a sudden there's this other kid that's the same age, named Daniel, who just is like him but absolutely like cooler.
A lot of that dealing with trauma stuff from NOES too.
Yes, exactly. And then he locks after Daniel tries to convince him to do something bad, he ends up locking him metaphorically in this dollhouse. And then years later, Daniel breaks out, and he's there, and he's played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, and he is just like, he's kind of like, I would say he's kind of like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho.
Yeah.
This kind of like cold, detached, slicked back hair, incredibly sexy. But like basically the id in this relationship between the two of them, and it just sort of goes from there, and it goes into some really interesting locations and directions. It gets a little trippy toward. I know you haven't, Mary Beth, but have you seen it, Josh?
Daniel Isn't Real?
Yeah.
No, I really want to though.
Yeah. It's
that's exactly
my
kind of jam. What you're describing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes out December 6th, so it's coming out soon on VOD and stuff for people to see. But like,
yes,
it's just, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really fantastic.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And so I really hope that Adam does get to do a Nightmare on Elm Street, because I think he will do a fantastic job. Because I was watching this thinking, oh, I could see him take this kind of idea and do this with. So yeah, I think it's gonna be really good. I hope people support it and support him.
So the thing that reminds me of is like, I'm so glad that this year, even more, like these movies that I'm so excited for are coming out on VOD so quickly. That just makes me feel like it's getting like these festival titles are getting so much more accessible, so much quicker, and I just love that. Like that so many. I mean, because I feel like, remember, like, direct-to-video is always such a bad thing. People are like, it's straight-to-video. But now I feel like direct-to-VOD is like, hell yeah, okay, everyone can watch it now. And like,
we're going to see something that's not commercial, but is going to be fucking wild.
Yeah, like,
basically.
Exactly. Like, I feel like direct-to-video is, like, such something different now. Like, it has such a different connotation. Right, and totally, I love that.
I mean, Martin Scorsese just did a direct-to-streaming film, and it's like, Martin Scorsese. I mean, you know.
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
I think once he does that, it's no longer taboo. You know?
Yeah, and it's like, you know, it shows you the power of streaming services. But sure. I mean, at the same time, I feel like a lot of them are like really supporting little horror directors and giving them like a lot of
100%
big platform. And I love it. It makes me very happy.
Yeah, movies like The Ranger and stuff like that can get, you know, fairly wide. Or One Cut of the Dead, you know.
Revenge, too. Revenge was like one of Shudder's first exclusives, I think. That sounds right.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And what about you, Mary Beth?
So, I'm still, like, kind of barely trying to keep my head above water with watching stuff, but I'm going to keep living my new job until one day I figure out how to fucking balance my life. But I got my boyfriend Steve bought me Nintendo Switch Lite, and I've been playing Luigi's Mansion 3, which is
oh my gosh,
it's just like basically Ghostbusters the movie, or Ghostbusters the video game.
Yeah,
and it's like my favorite video game franchise. Like, I know it's so cheesy, but I love Luigi's Mansion. Like, that was my favorite game on
they're so great.
On the GameCube.
Mario Brothers plus Ghosts. I mean,
exactly.
You know, how
and
can
like,
you go wrong?
Luigi's Mansion was my favorite game on GameCube because we really only played Nintendo stuff at my house, and it was kind of like my way to play horror games without it being too scary. And so I've been playing a lot of Luigi's Mansion 3, and it's
so good.
So good. It's so much fun, and it's just like it's like difficult in a good way, like not too difficult, but it makes you think. And you have this little guy named Gooigi who is Luigi's gooey clone, which has led to a lot of really gross jokes on the internet. But it's really fun, and I've had a really good time. That's been a really good kind of like turn off my brain.
Sets itself up for that, yeah.
I know, but it's a good like kind of turn off my brain in a different way, kind of way. I've been enjoying horror media, and I also have been reading a lot of horror short stories recently. Actually, it's been like a thing I've been really getting into. So I really like Lovecraftian, eldritch horror.
Yeah.
Weird shit. So I've talked a lot about wounds.
The old gods.
Yeah, but there's this really good collection called The Black Wings of Cthulhu, which is a collection of 21 stories that are kind of inspired by Lovecraft. And it's really good. There's some really good stuff in there from like contemporary authors that I've really enjoyed. And my boyfriend, again, Steve, is really into Lovecraft, and so introduced me to the book. And it's a really good collection of like creepy short stories that take the ethos of Lovecraft and adapt it into something for the modern era. So
That's cool. What was it called again?
On the Black Wings of Cthulhu.
On the Black Wings of Cthulhu. That sounds cool.
Yeah, it's really good. So I've been shirking on watching, but I've been doing a lot of reading and video games. So
I sometimes need a break.
still getting a lot of horror, just in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now that we've talked about what we watched recently, should we move on to the movie of the episode?
Yes.
All right.
So what did you bring with you today, Josh?
Well, it's
Laugh Riot.
Oh my God, isn't it just a knee slapper from start to finish? It's 1980s, I'd say late 80s, and I am little Josh sitting in Nacogdoches, Texas, at my sister Paula's apartment, watching what anyone watches with their sister, which is a wonderful 2-hour-long deep dive into trauma and sexual assault. Movie called The Entity.
So to all of our listeners now, we're going to start talking about The Entity, so we want to give our trigger warning for sexual assault, gaslighting, and trauma. So if that... Just, we will not be upset. If you need to stop listening, please feel free. Yep. From now on, we'll be talking about that movie.
Yep, take care
absolutely.
of yourself.
Two things that are incredibly prevalent are men being the absolute worst and not listening to women, and spectral sexual assault. So, definitely trigger warnings abound. And on both ends of that experience, for sure.
So, just to bring our listeners up to speed, we'll just give you a quick synopsis of The Entity. But given the subject matter, we will not be doing a silly, flippant synopsis because of how serious this is. 1982's The Entity is based on a book by the screenwriter of the film, and it's about a single mom played by Barbara Hershey who was constantly sexually assaulted by a ghost or multiple ghosts. It could easily have been called Gaslight the Movie because no one believes her. It's a harrowing movie that doesn't provide any easy answers. So it's a really intense experience. And Josh, why? How old were you when you saw this movie? What did you think was happening when you first saw this movie?
We have a lot of questions.
Break it down for me, because I watched this for the first time last night, and I cannot understand how a child could have sat through that entire 2-hour excruciatingly upsetting experience.
Exactly. And I think that it comes largely from what I was saying earlier about that I come from a horror-loving family, so we just sort of watched everything. Okay. And we were much more into, B horror. For example, I've mentioned Killer Clowns several times already, but it is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's a great example of the type of movie that we watched. Anything that was gory and fun. And so sometimes, being willing to watch just about anything leads you down a path that you otherwise would not have taken. So I don't know that any of us knew what this movie was about. It just had this creepy, cool cover and was called The Entity. It sounds really frightening and wonderful. And so I think we just grabbed it at the video store. And I want to read what the description is on the cover. It just says, "A story so shocking, so threatening, it'll frighten you beyond all imagination, based on a true story." So it's if that's all you know, then you think, okay, sounds great. The Entity. Yeah. Ooh, sounds like a creature feature or something.
We're talking about bad marketing. Very intentionally vague.
It wasn't that.
Yeah.
No, it was not. It also, what's weird too, is it's directed by this guy. I don't know if I'm going to say his last name right, but Sidney Furie. Is it Fury?
I'm not sure, but that's how I've been pronouncing it. So.
Fury? I don't know. But he did a bunch of other kind of mainstream fun movies like Iron Eagle and stuff like that.
Superman 4.
Yeah.
I know, the one with the cool dude from the sun. Right. Exactly. Ladybugs? Come on. Ladybugs? The guy that made this movie made a Rodney Dangerfield comedy vehicle about coaching a soccer team. How is this the same guy? But point is, if you look at his filmography, you wouldn't think oh, we're going to get into some real heavy shit.
Yeah. So
no, you think...
How old were you when you saw this?
So my guess in looking back at it, it was probably around like 7 or 8.
Oh my God.
So it was like
Okay.
1988 or so, 87.
Okay.
My sister and I were staying at my sister Paula's. I'm one of like 9 kids, so it was fairly common
Oh, wow. Okay.
that like my parents would be like, "Hey, go stay with this person for the weekend."
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was staying with my sister who was in college at the time, and like I said, we just got it from the video store, and I wasn't scared or moved by anything, but this movie really hit me hard, big time. I mean, not the least of which just for the visual.
What about it? Like, was there a scene in particular that really stuck out to you and scared you? Or, like, what was it about it that had such an impact on you as a child?
You know, as a kid, I don't think I would have been able to articulate it. I think that it just scared the shit out of me. But in preparation for and in reflecting on it, over the years and recently when getting ready to do this podcast, I think to me a lot of it, and this is probably what's scary for a lot of people, is the lack of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's nothing she can do about it. And hey, spoiler alert, if anyone's planning to watch it, push the mute button now, but it says at the end, like, hey, they moved and they left the house, but it never stopped happening. It's like, holy shit.
It's awful. And because this actually happened to a woman. Like, this is based on a true story. Like, this is a real thing that happened to somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had, you want a quick ghost story time?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so I had a really freaky experience as a kid that later led to sleep paralysis issues. But basically, I had this experience as a kid. And first of all, I know that you guys have talked about on the show that there are kind of different types of horror fans. Some are believers and some are non-believers when it comes to a lot of the paranormal and the supernatural.
Right.
99%, I would fall into the non-believer category. I don't believe in angels, demons, gods, ghosts, whatever. It's not that I think that it's impossible. It's more like intelligent life on other planets. Like, I recognize it's possible.
Okay.
I also just don't really think about it or are concerned about it, So for me, I'm not someone who's typically spooked by ghosts or things like that. But anyway, long story short, I used to have this boy who I don't know a name for him or anything, but he would come into my room at night and he'd come over to my bed and ask me if I wanted to come play.
Oh, what the fuck?
I know, right? And he was super wet, like dripping.
Excuse
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And his arms were like all mangled and he was all like gross, like he'd been underwater.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting goosebumps.
No, totally. It's about to get worse.
Jesus Christ.
So it was something that would regularly happen to me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I would try to talk to him, I would try to say things, but I would mostly just be totally gripped by fear. And I thought nobody's going to believe me, and I would occasionally tell someone, and of course, just like in this movie, nobody thought anything of it. They all thought, oh, that's cute. And so on and so forth, right?
Right.
But then I had a sleepover birthday, and he came into the room, and the next morning I'm at breakfast, and one of my friends, Jared, hello Jared, was like, hey, who was that boy that came into the room last night? He didn't look like your brother. And all the blood like drained out of me. And I was just like, you saw him? And it started to become this thing where I was obsessed, but the thing that always scared me about it and what traumatized me about it was that there was nothing I could do about it. It just kept happening. And I'm not equating it to the experiences that Barbara Hershey's character had, but my point is, I think that is really what struck me most about this movie as a young person, because it felt very like, oh my God, I know how that feels to have a ghost come and impact your life in a way, and you can't stop a ghost. Like, what are you supposed to do? Like, call the police?
Right.
Like slap them? what would work? A gun? Nothing. And usually it's like, well, okay, paranormal activity type stuff. But if it's something that is like my experience or like the experience of Miss Moran in the movie, it can be something much scarier and traumatizing that you really can't stop. You just sort of hope it ends in a way.
Wow.
Yeah. So, wow.
Jesus, Josh,
Wow.
thanks for sharing that story. That's so awful.
Do you want the super creepy conclusion to it?
Yes,
Oh,
duh. You
yes.
can't not give it.
I'm just teasing it out there. So, all right, here's where it gets super weird, but it's actually not related to the entity at all, but it's just a fun story. So my father would bring food to a somewhat nearby neighbor of ours a few houses down. And I would go with him every once in a while, if depending on when we were doing, coming home from something or things like that. And one day, I'm just sitting in the living room, like flipping through the books on the coffee table, being bored, while my dad talks to the mom of the family and like gives her the food that we were bringing over. And I'm flipping through a family photo album, and there's the boy.
Oh, this isn't real,
boy.
Josh. This feels like a movie.
And so I was like,
No.
Okay. And I like walked outside, waited for my dad, and I talked to my dad, and I said, hey, who are these people?
Valid
why-
question. Who are they?
Right. Why do we go over to their house? And so he tells me that years ago, when I was like a baby, that the son of the family drowned.
No.
So I grew up like right by water, right? Drowned right outside of our house.
Jesus
And
Christ.
It had nothing to do with us. It was in the middle of the night type thing. But since then, once a week or whatever, we'll go by and visit or bring a meal or things like that. And I was like, uh-huh.
What the fuck, Josh?
I know, right? So when we moved houses when I was like in 8th grade, suddenly I never saw the boy again. So for me, thank God, it was located to that house.
Right.
For Miss Moran, it seemed to not be, based on the little postscript at the end. But I really think that's a big part of it. That and having 7 sisters, and just the whole idea of like the sort of sexual assault stuff being real heavy. But I think for me, it really came from that experience of just feeling like I also have a ghost that visits me all the time and traumatizes me and scares the shit out of me, and I also cannot stop it. And so I think in a little kid mind, you kind of put those dots together without realizing the dots you're putting together.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
So anyway, what do you guys think?
Holy
So the thing is that you kind of mentioned that people are in 2 different camps about like not believing or believing.
Yeah.
And, I talked on the previous episode that I don't believe, but like you just gave me fucking goosebumps, man.
Yeah, well, and same here. I mean, I'm not someone who typically thinks about those sorts of things, but at the same time, I think some of us have had experiences that we really just sort of can't explain.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you can say, oh, well, maybe I just had an overactive imagination, or
Right.
things like that. And it's like,
Pups.
didn't feel that way to me.
So
There you go.
Oh, okay. So this was my first time watching it. And
Same.
this
Can I say before you even get there that this was originally optioned by Roman Polanski, and how weird that is to me?
Nope.
Because a lot of the mansplaining, gaslighty parts of it, I think, oh, how ironic,
yeah.
Well, it feels like similar to Rosemary's Baby, and it also made me think of The Exorcist a lot, like the the medicalization of the female body, which is something one of my colleagues, Charlie, has written about for a site I write for, but about like the female body becoming a site of hysteria and something that can be poked and prodded and condescended to, and just seen as like a mass that can be experimented on. And it's so frustrating as a woman myself, like, who has been, like, I'm going to be really honest here, I have been sexually assaulted. And so this movie was really hard for me to watch. But it's even harder to watch because of the way she was treated by everybody. And I mean, like, I had
realistic.
It is really, I mean, like, even if it's a ghost, like, the way that people look at her and, like, will talk to her, and, like, that's what happened to me because a lot of people knew who I was assaulted by, and they told me I was, like, a liar. And this movie takes a concept that could maybe seem a little bit exploitative and handles it in a way that isn't always perfect. I think there are a lot of exploitative elements in this, like, in the way her assaults are shot, and I think it gets very sensational. But it doesn't always spill over into the exploitative. It does try to kind of toe this line of showing her perspective and understanding. Yeah. At the beginning, I did get kind of frustrated where they kept showing, like, her therapist, like, trying to own her and being like, she shouldn't be seeing those parapsychologists. She's my patient, and, like, trying to basically, like, assert dominance over her. And that was exceptionally frustrating because I was like, I don't give a shit about his feelings about this. It has nothing to do with him. He's a total, like,
it was perfect casting, too, because Ron Silver, I think, always plays that kind of smarmy, arrogant prick in movies in the 80s, and he was perfect as that Dr. Sneederman or whatever, however you say it.
Yeah, and he was
where it's like, well, you piece of shit.
I know. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you think you know what's best for her, but you don't, and you just think her kids are, I don't know. Like, that was just is so frustratingly realistic.
Yes.
In a way that I was like, we don't need to see this. But at the same time, like, I appreciated the way, like, the care I think that was taken for the most part in this movie.
Yeah.
Especially being directed by a guy, I just, like, because I've done a lot of stuff with rape revenge movies, and I'm so used to seeing those kinds of things handled in such, like, a male gazy kind of awful way. And this movie kind of at first I feel like it tries to avoid that at first, but then I feel
there's a couple scenes towards the end. Some of the later,
yes. Well, it feels like they just wanted to get more and more sensational. It's like they were like the very first time she's assaulted. It's like very like it's not trying to focus on nudity, and it's like, okay, I can get behind this. Like, all right. And then the final or one of the last moments, like, she's just full naked and everything. I'm like, oh well. You guys were just working up to it. Like, it wasn't even, like, trying
We've got to have Barbara Hershey take her top off.
I know.
You've got to work that in, fellas, somehow.
Of course, like, her, like, the creepy way, like, her breast is being manipulated by the ghost hands. That was fucking creepy. That was awful. Like,
it was... I hate to say really well done, but it was really...
It was really well done.
God damn it. Yeah. So, that actually, those parts were done by Stan Winston. I know, which is like, they were really well done. I mean, he's like one of the kings, of practical effects. And, I mean, how amazing, but also, like, fuck that.
Well, and then another moment that really got me is actually related to your story, Josh. When your friend Jared saw the boy, like when her friend came into the house and was like, "I saw it," and she started crying and was smiling. I was like, "I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry too." Like, she's finally getting validation that
that scene was like a punch to the stomach for me.
A woman.
Well, okay, that's okay.
Right.
Let me talk about female friendship for a second. This movie has a beautiful female friendship that I wanted more of because her friend was amazing and her friend was there for her every step of the way. And her friend, even though she said to go to therapy, that's typically a very kind thing of a friend to do and not think you're crazy and just be like, oh, just try it. And then she
get a little healthy.
She apologized for that, and, like, she defends her, and she comes over, and they sleep in the same bed, and it's not weird. I don't know. Like, it was just such a very joyful, like, friendship and supportive friendship. Her friend never, like, left her behind because of all of this. And then her friend also was another kind of, like, figure that shows that men ain't shit. Like, her husband would yell at her, and she kind of talks about how she's too scared to leave, and that made me feel like, okay, this movie is trying to really has, like, as a core thesis about the way that women are looked at and treated by, like, such a male-dominated patriarchal society, and I wasn't expecting that either. Like, there was kind of a thoughtful way of how women, even in just, like, romantic relationships are taken advantage of and not believed and not cared for. And I just loved that element of them. I wish there was more of that in the movie, but
yeah. And you're absolutely right. There's definitely this thing where her friend believes her and it doesn't really matter. And, her son believes her, but, okay, well, that's family. It's not until, like, Jerry, the boyfriend, says, I also saw it, that they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should take this seriously. And it's like, oh, my God.
But then he leaves her, and he's like, I can't deal with this. I can deal with cancer, but I can't deal with that. I'm like, way to make it about you,
well, yeah,
Jerry.
Right. I mean, he's a piece of shit.
So that's something that, like, I noticed right away was the absence of men. And I mean, like, absent, like, they are not necessarily not on screen, although that is the case for a lot of them, but just there's no support system. So, like, you talked about her friend Cindy and her husband. Well, we don't even see her husband in the first half of the movie. It's a voice from a different room yelling about how she probably got her butt evicted. We don't get to see him at all. And then, we find out about her father that was, like, a priest, but he's not in the picture. We learn about her first couple
I forgot
husbands.
about that. Her dad's supposed to be a priest?
Yeah, her dad was in the maybe not a priest, but a minister. Maybe it's some religious.
Yeah, he was some kind of figure in the church.
Yeah. And sexually assaulted her. And then, we see her first husband that she had her first kid with, and we don't see him at all. He's not, he's dead. He's not in the picture. And then and then her boyfriend is like, we see him until the very end. We barely ever see him.
Yeah.
And it's always one night stands. And it's always like, and he even makes that comment. And, like, even when we do see him that time, it pissed me off so much, was when he comes home and he, like, it hands her a dress and he's like, oh, put it on for my homecoming, put it on for me. It's this kind of sense of entitlement and ownership of this relationship that he thinks he has power over.
And you pointing that out makes me feel like I wonder if the misogyny and some of that sort of stuff was intentional to make that drive that point home, the point that Mary Beth was also making, because that's really surprising to me as an early 80s film that was produced by men, written by men, shot by men, edited by men. If they did work that in, that sort of aspect of the story, I find that both surprising and I think you're right.
Yeah, I think, Terry, I paid a lot of attention to that too with the way the men were shot. And I'm going to give props to Fury. Like, he made a really interesting, poignant movie about women, and sorry y'all, but, like, that's pretty surprising to me, especially in that era, on the way that men, like, the way that men create movies, like we've talked about, like, it's shocking, and I'm really surprised this movie isn't talked about more in that regard. Like, and a lot of my research, like, about these kinds of movies, this movie isn't talked about, and I think it's really important, and it's strange that no one talks about it, because I think there's a lot of really fascinating things going on in this movie that should be discussed more. And I mean, I'm glad, Josh, I'm glad you brought it to us. And it was upsetting to watch, but, like, I think it's an important, I think it's a really important movie that shows what horror can do. Like, we talked about slow burns. I mean, Jesus Christ, this movie's 2 hours long. And there's a lot of awful things happening. Like, there are a lot of stretches of her just in doctor's offices. It feel like, again, like similar to The Exorcist, single mom. Right. It's like a single mom, and even though in The Exorcist it's not happening to her, it's like this a very kind of like there's a lot of parallels. I feel like in terms
it's happening
of, like,
to her family. Right?
Yeah, and speaking of her family, shout out to her kids. Good Lord, like, please go to therapy. Those poor children.
Oh my God, I know.
Good God.
Apparently, it was worse in real life. In researching coming in preparation for today, the kids suffered, like, broken bones and all sorts of things in real life.
Yeah, because I know that in the movie, Billy gets his wrist broken, but we don't talk about it a ton other than that. Like with the lightning.
So crazy. It's just so crazy to me to think that this is even remotely true. It's just so disturbing. And even if just for that, like what you're saying, I mean, an important story to be told, like this woman's story, the real woman whose name is not the same as Barbara Hershey's character. Like just people knowing it, that this is a thing that really happened, and that's horrible.
Yeah.
And cool that American Cinema International, that's another thing about this movie that's so random, is the studio behind it is this like studio known for making real cheesy family movies like Toby Goes to Camp, or Mama's Getting a Baby for Christmas. Like these sorts of like cheesy straight to video type stuff. And here this thing in their catalog exists called The Entity. I think that's really cool that it just sort of happened to get made somehow, this woman's story. And to her, I'm sure it felt like, oh my God, finally this is getting told. And Barbara Hershey, for crying out loud.
Well, and Barbara Hershey, I think Terry and I were talking about this on Twitter last night. Barbara Hershey brings her fucking A game in this movie.
Right.
She is fucking phenomenal in this. It's what a raw, convincing, and powerful performance.
Right. Exactly.
It's what completely sells the story. Is her performance.
Yeah, and then it just sort of got swept under the rug of history, and
right. I feel like this movie could have gotten really cheesy really quickly without that convincing lead, and I just think her emotional investment in this role is just makes it something that you really root for her and you feel for her.
Yeah,
and I only had seen her in Insidious before, and I just feel bad that I'm not more familiar with her filmography, because she was good in Insidious.
Yeah, she was.
Absolutely. And then as the mom in Black Swan.
That's right. Okay, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I wanted to go back to something that you had mentioned a little bit earlier, Mary Beth, about the idea of the female body being kind of like a lab rat in a way,
Yeah.
That's something that literally happens in this movie. By the end of the movie, they're building a replica house, and
oh my God.
they're putting her inside of it. Yeah. And it's like, at that point, she literally becomes a rat in a maze of this.
And weirdly not in a supportive way.
No.
But like in a, well, we'll see what happens kind of way.
Well, and that was so fascinating, because there's that moment where it's the two men, the two parapsychologists are yay, shaking with excitement, but then the woman, the female professor, seems very kind of reserved and a little bit this is a very weird thing we're doing, her experience as a woman I can identify with.
Totally.
So I was oh, okay, we're gonna get to this kind of this kind of nuance and contention between the way these men are looking at her versus the woman scientist, but then it completely goes away as soon as they're showing her the house.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And even before that, I made a note, because what also kind of got me thinking about this after you mentioned that earlier was the group of doctors deciding what's happening to her.
Yes.
So she's not even present, and these doctors are deciding, and all of them, for the most part, there's a handful of women, and they're either discounted or they're corrected by the men, or they are kind of agreeing with the men, but mostly it's a group of these old male doctors calling, hysteria, and just digging into that kind of, gosh, I don't even know where I'm going with that, but
I know exactly what you mean. When they start hinting at, well, maybe she's has overactive sexuality and kind of making allusions to incestuous feelings about her son and things like that, I was just no, fuck you.
That was actually more pronounced they shot a scene where I guess the entity made her have a dream about her son.
Oh, for the love of Christ.
And they cut it.
Yeah, but there's that old view that women, have this sort of uncontrollable sexual urges that who knows, maybe that's what's happening. And they don't come out and really say that, but I think it goes to what you're saying, Terry, just that they are sort of theorizing from an outside perspective. And of course, if they had asked her, she'd be like, what? No, ooh, fuck you,
Right.
But from their perspective, it's well, maybe it's this. Her hysteria, or whatever. And it's just oh my God.
Well, and like these guys are in it's all white lab coats and sucking on cigars in a room full of smoke. And like, come on, like how
Right,
stereotypical
yeah.
can you get? And like the good old smoking on the giant's like phallic cigar. It's just it's just funny that like
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Fury definitely leaned into those kinds of tropes in a way that like hits you over the head a little bit, but in a way that I think is important.
Right, it's surprising.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I also think that this and maybe I'm giving the movie too much credit, but when I was watching it, I got like a feeling of the same kind of feeling I got when I was watching Hereditary, and not necessarily to the same degree, but like there's two stories going on. There's the outward facing story, which is this kind of supernatural assault on this woman that's constantly happening.
I'm sorry,
But
my
then I
cat
think-
is walking in. He's going to start
I
meowing.
know
I
he's
apologize.
so cute. I love him.
Chairman Meow is always welcome.
But I think that there's a subtext to it that I think that if this wasn't a movie, is something that the therapists are actually kind of digging into, is this kind of repressed trauma of her father. I mean, I think that there's definitely some connection there with the fact that she sees this big guy that's doing it and he's more powerful than her. I feel like that there is something there, and I think what I found interesting watching this is by the end of the movie, she kind of gathers her own. She kind of comes into her own. Like one of the parts I wrote down in particular was when the creepy psychiatrist is basically trying to date her, and she's like, "I don't want to make that contact," and it was like that was like a.
Sorry.
Your cat. That was like a finger snapping moment for me because she's basically
Absolutely.
saying, "No, dude, I don't want to date you. This is not going to be a Yumi situation."
Yeah, well, and she makes a comment, and I wish I had written it down, but in the very last scene where she gets kind of confrontational with this entity or force or whatever.
Yep, she
and
says,
she says something. Yeah, go ahead.
"It's she says I'm so tired of being scared. Do what you want, but you can't have me. You cannot touch me. That's mine."
Yes, exactly. That's it. You can't have me. That's the part that I remember. And
Yeah.
that's so. I loved that moment where it was just like, yeah, girl.
Well, and I think this is where the subtext kind of comes in for me, is this idea that, she's coming into her own, she's standing up for herself, and she's saying, no, this body does belong to me. And then, yes, there's the post note about how, the attacks are still happening, but they're coming less frequently. I think if you look at that as like a subtext, it is the trauma and the PTSD of surviving
It doesn't
the
go
situation
away,
that she's
but
survived
it
with.
can
And it's
become
always going to be there.
More manageable or more, softened in a way. Right. That's really cool.
And again, maybe I'm giving the story too much credit, but that's kind of how I took the ending. I mean, it's still a fucking depressing ending.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Fair.
It doesn't give any easy answers to things.
No.
But like
That's
it
almost
just
to
it
your
kind
point,
of
though.
it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Hereditary, the kind of subtext of that movie being about genetic trauma and about generational trauma.
And things definitely weren't wrapped up in a nice bow.
No.
In Hereditary either. Right.
But I mean, maybe I'm looking too much into it. But what do you guys? What do you
No, I
about
think that you're
I agree.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Wow.
The entity.
The entity.
We watched it. We survived it. And I'd love to never see Ron Silver again, or at least not for a few months.
Fuck him. Fuck that guy.
He was so good. He's so
was
good
really good
at
as it.
like being that smarmy piece of shit in
I
so
think
many
the performances
movies in the 80s
overall
and
were
90s.
were just so good overall. I mean, her son the guy that played her son was really good. I thought.
I know. Oh, her son was great.
Yeah.
Is he,
and like
has he
you
stuck
commented
around?
on.
Is he still in stuff? This is Billy, right? We're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Billy.
Yeah, I don't know. He was good. I watched Mommy Dearest the other day, and every once in a while there's some child actor from the 80s that I think like, oh, they were so good. What are they in now?
He was in 24, the
the TV
back
show?
in 2003.
Oh, okay. So he's around.
He looks like he's done a lot of TV stuff.
Okay, well, good. So we can find him if we look.
But and like you said, Mary Beth, I really liked her friend. I thought what's her name, Cindy. I thought Cindy was such an integral part to the story, and the actress played her really well, especially the scene where she's like apologizing.
Yeah, and I feel like she's definitely that character with like the southern accent who seems like she's just so sugary sweet, like she can't really be anything, but she really was one of the most important characters to me in the movie, and like was the most important support character outside of her own family that like really was there for her no matter what. And even if she thought something like didn't know what was happening, she was still there for her friend. Like she didn't shun her or keep her away, and that I think is really important to me, like in showing like support for your friend no matter what they're going through and trying to get them to like kind of go through it.
Yeah, and even when like you mentioned, even when she doesn't necessarily believe her, or she's still there for her and is you know, trying to find solutions and trying to be that support system. And I think that's I think this could have played so differently with a different character of her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it did have a surprisingly large amount of insight into the female experience, considering other than actors, I don't know that female adults were involved in this at all, you know, other than a few actors. And given the time period too, it's really surprising. But I do think that they did a good job of some of that stuff, which I didn't expect. Looking back, I half expected to go back and be like, oh my God, this is such cheesy garbage. But it, you know, Lifetime drama type stuff, and it really wasn't.
I thought it was going to be something very similar, like Lifetime drama, but definitely was not that at all.
No.
So I mean, it seems kind of weird to phrase it this way, but did you like the movie, Mary Beth?
I think I did. I mean, I had to watch it in chunks. I think I had a really hard time watching it all the way through. But ultimately, I did enjoy it. I don't think I'll probably ever watch it again. But I'm glad I watched it, and I think it is an important film. And if you are able to watch something like this with this kind of subject matter, I would definitely recommend people to watch it. But again, I don't think it's something you need to kind of overcome that trauma for to watch. But yeah, I actually really did enjoy it.
It's one of the things Mary Beth and I were talking about is like, because when we asked you what movie you'd want to bring, and you mentioned this one and Silver Bullet, and this gave me a reason, I guess, to watch this movie.
Yeah,
and that's kind of why I was excited to talk this one with because like, it's not a movie that especially, you know, it's a 2-hour movie, and it's the sexual assault happens so many times in it that it's not something that I don't think I'd be able to just sit down and consume. Just to consume it.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I don't think that's something I'd be like, hey guys, do you want to watch The Entity tonight?
No, in fact, it reminds me a lot of Martyrs and Incident at Ghostland.
Oh, interesting.
Movies that are well made and great that I am happy to never watch again. You know.
Yeah, I think that also with Hounds of Love, we brought that up. It's like, glad I saw it, so happy. Never
I loved it so much, and I've not watched it since.
Yep, the best movie I never want to watch again.
Exactly, because it is tough. It's a heavy subject matter for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. Well, are we ready to wrap up, I think, Terry?
I think so, yeah.
It was a really good talk about that movie.
This was a good talk.
I think so, too.
Thanks, guys, for talking about such a intense movie, but I think it's important to talk about these things and realize that, again, like another example that horror is really always has been trying to deal with insanely heavy subject matter. And while
I think that's...
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. You go.
I think that it's kind of an important movie to talk about because so much of our conversation so far has been on, you know, it's like these kind of more fun horror movies, right? So, I mean, this last episode that we just recorded with Issa was about Saw, and it's kind of a dark subject matter, but like we've talked Nightmare on Elm Street and Jaws, and it's kind of nice to see this other side of what can terrify you. And I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations, even if they are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. And if anything can be taken away from the recent advances and developments in how women are viewed and how women are treated in our society, I think a lot of it can boil down to listening and giving women a voice and a perspective that's listened to and actually heard. And, you know, this is a movie that in that respect, I think was a little ahead of its time, because it's saying, listen, people, listen. You know, like if you just listened to her, then so much of this could have been addressed or avoided.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Whew. Wow.
Okay. Well, thank you, Josh, for joining us to talk about.
And we can talk Gary Busey and werewolves in the future.
Yes. Well, thank you for talking The Entity with us.
Absolutely.
Where can our listeners find you? And do you have anything upcoming that you want to plug that you're maybe writing or anything?
Well, no, not necessarily. I still write with Nightmare on Film Street, so you can find me there under my actual name, which is Josh Pond. And then in terms of online otherwise, I'm on Twitter. It's at Mr. Josh 79, because I guess there are a lot of other Mr. Joshes out there. Other than that, no.
Great. So, listeners, you've heard from us, but now we want to hear from you. What has your experience been with The Entity? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, and we might feature you in an upcoming episode. You can also reach out to us on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gailey Dreadful.
There's my cat. And of course, tag us at Scarred Podcast if you want to talk to us on Twitter.
And don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. It really does help us out, guys.
It does. Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our amazing music. And thank you to everyone for listening to us. Stay creepy.
And until next time.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children?
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.